Chapter 70 of the Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. The Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12, by Anonymous. Translated by Richard Francis Burton. Section 70. The Tale of the Damsel. Tuhfat Al-Kulub, Volume 12, page 70. An entertaining story, but very inconsistent in the character of Iblis, who is constantly termed, in good Muslim fashion, the accursed, yet seems to be somewhat of a follower of the Prophet, and on the whole a good-natured sort of fellow. His mode of expressing his approval of the damsel's musical talent is, to say the least, original. End of section 70. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Section 71 of the Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sindhu Ravindran. The Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12, by Anonymous. Translated by Richard Francis Burton. Section 71. Women's Wiles. A variant, perhaps an older form, of this story occurs in the tale of Prince Fadlala, which is interwoven with the history of Prince Khalif and the Princess of China in the Persian tales of the 1001 Days. The prince, on his way to Baghdad, is attacked by robbers. His followers are all slain and himself made prisoner, but he is set at liberty by the compassionate wife of the robber chief during his absence on a plundering expedition. When he reaches Baghdad, he has no resource but to beg his bread, and having stationed himself in front of a large mansion, an old female slave presently comes out and gives him a loaf. At this moment a gust of wind blew aside the curtain of a window and discovered to his admiring eyes a most beautiful damsel, of whom he became immediately enamored. He inquired of a passer-by the name of the owner of the mansion, and was informed that it belonged to a man called Muafak, who had been lately governor of the city, but having quarrelled with the Qazi, who was of a revengeful disposition, the latter had found means to disgrace him with the Caliph and to have him deprived of his office. After lingering near the house in vain till nightfall, in hopes of once more obtaining a glimpse of this beauty, he retired for the night to a burying ground, where he was soon joined by two thieves, who pressed upon him a share of the good cheer with which they had provided themselves. For while the thieves were feasting and talking over a robbery which they had just accomplished, the police suddenly pounced upon them and took all three and cast them into prison. In the morning they were examined by the Qazi, and the thieves, seeing it was useless to deny it, confessed their crime. The prince then told the Qazi how he chanced to fall into company of the thieves, who confirmed all he said, and he was set at liberty. Then the Qazi began to question him as to how he had employed his time since he came to Baghdad, to which he answered very frankly but concealed his rank. On his mentioning the brief glance he had of the beautiful lady at the window of the ex-governor's house, the Qazi's eyes sparkled with apparent satisfaction, and he assured the prince that he should have the lady for his bride. For believing the prince to be a mere beggarly adventurer, he resolved to foist him on Muafak as the son of a great monarch. So, having sent the prince to the bath and provided him with rich garments, The Qazi dispatched a messenger to request Muwaffaq to come to him on important business. When the ex-governor arrived, the Qazi told him blandly that there was now an excellent opportunity for doing away the ill will that had so long existed between them. "It is this," continued he, "the Prince of Basra, having fallen in love with your daughter from report of her great beauty, has just come to Baghdad, unknown to his father, and intends to demand her of you in marriage. He is lodged in my house, and is most anxious that this affair should be arranged by my interposition, which is the most agreeable to me, since it will, I trust, be the means of reconciling our differences." Muwaffaq expressed his surprise that the Prince of Basra should think of marrying his daughter, and especially that the proposal should come through the Qazi of all men. But the Qazi begged him to forget their former animosity and consent to the immediate celebration of the nuptials. While they were thus talking, the prince entered in a magnificent dress, and was not a little astonished to be presented to Muwaffaq by the treacherous Qazi as the Prince of Basra, who had come as a suitor for his daughter in marriage. The ex-governor saluted him with every token of profound respect, and expressed his sense of the honor of such an alliance. His daughter was unworthy to wait upon the meanest of the prince's slaves. In brief, the marriage is at once celebrated, and the prince duly retires to the bridal chamber with the beauteous daughter of Muwaffaq. But in the morning, at an early hour, a servant of the Qazi knocks at his door, and on the prince opening it says that he brings him his rags of clothes, and is required to take back the dress which the Qazi had lent him yesterday to personate the Prince of Basra. The prince, having donned his tattered garments, said to his wife, "The Qazi thinks he has married you to a wretched beggar. But I am no whit inferior in rank to the Prince of Basra. I am also a prince, being the only son of the king of Mosul," and then proceeded to recount all his adventures. When he had concluded his recital, the lady dispatched a servant to procure a suitable dress for the prince, which when he had put on, she said, "I see it all. The Qazi, no doubt, believes that by this time we are all overwhelmed with shame and grief. But what must be his feelings when he learns that he has been a benefactor to his enemies? Before you disclose to him your real rank, however, we must contrive to punish him for his malicious intentions. There is a dyer in this town who has a frightfully ugly daughter, but leave this affair in my hands." The lady then dressed herself in plain but becoming apparel, and went out of the house alone. She proceeded to the court of the Qazi, who no sooner cast his eyes upon her than he was struck with her elegant form. He sent an officer to inquire of her who she was and what she had come about. She made answer that she was the daughter of an artisan in the city, and that she desired to have some private conversation with the Qazi. When the officer reported the lady's reply, the Qazi directed her to be conducted into a private chamber, where he presently joined her and gallantly placed his services at her disposal. The lady now removed her veil, and asked him whether he saw anything ugly or repulsive in her features. The Qazi, on seeing her beautiful face, was suddenly plunged in the sea of love, and declared that her forehead was of polished silver, her eyes were sparkling diamonds, her mouth a ruby casket containing a bracelet of pearls. Then she displayed her arms, so white and plump, the sight of which threw the Qazi into ecstasies, and almost caused him to faint. Quoth the lady, "I must tell you, my lord, that with all the beauty I possess, my father, a dyer in the city, keeps me secluded, and declares to all who come to ask me in marriage that I am an ugly, deformed monster, a mere skeleton, lame and full of diseases." On this the Qazi burst into a tirade against the brutal father, who could thus traduce so much beauty, and vowed that he would make her his wife that same day. The lady, after expressing her fears that he would not find it easy to gain her father's consent, took her leave and returned home. The Qazi lost no time in sending for the dyer, and after complimenting him upon his reputation for piety, said to him, I am informed that behind the curtain of chastity you have a daughter ripe for marriage. Is not this true? Replied the dyer, My lord, you have been rightly informed. I have a daughter who is indeed fully ripe for marriage, for she is more than 30 years of age. But the poor creature is not fit to be a wife to any man. She is very ugly, lame, leprous, and foolish. In short, she is such a monster that I am obliged to keep her out of all people's sight. Ha! exclaimed the Qazi, you can't impose on me with such a tale. I was prepared for it, but let me tell you that I myself am ready and willing to marry that same ugly and leprous daughter of yours, with all her defects. When the dyer heard this, he looked the Qazi full in the face and said, My lord, you're welcome to divert yourself by making a jest of my daughter. No, replied the Qazi, I'm quite in earnest. I demand your daughter in marriage. The dyer broke into laughter, saying, By Allah, someone has meant to play you a trick, my lord. I forewarn you that she is ugly, lame, and leprous. True, responded the Qazi with a knowing smile. I know her by these tokens. I shall take her notwithstanding. The dyer, seeing him determined to marry his daughter, and being now convinced that he had been imposed upon by some ill-wisher, said to himself, I must demand of him a round sum of money which may cause him to cease troubling me any further about my poor daughter. So he said to the Qazi, My lord, I am ready to obey your command, but I will not part with my daughter unless you pay me beforehand a dowry of 1,000 sequins. Replied the Qazi, Although methinks your demand is somewhat exorbitant, yet I will pay you the money at once. Which having done, he ordered the contract to be drawn up. But when it came to be signed, the dyer declared that he would not sign save in the presence of 100 men of the law. Thou art very distrustful, said the Qazi, but I will comply in everything, for I am resolved to make sure of thy daughter. So he sent for all the men of law in the city, and when they were assembled in the house of the Qazi, the dyer said that he was now willing to sign the contract. But I declare, he added, in the presence of these honourable witnesses, that I do so on the condition that if my daughter should not prove to your liking when you have seen her, and you should determine to divorce her, you shall oblige yourself to give her 1,000 sequins of gold, in addition to the same amount which I have already received from you. Agreed, said the Qazi. I oblige myself to it, and call this whole assembly to be witnesses. Art thou now satisfied? I am, replied the dyer, who then went his way, saying that he would at once send him his bride. As soon as the dyer was gone, the assembly broke up, and the Qazi was left alone in his house. He had been 2 years married to the daughter of a merchant of Baghdad, with whom he had hitherto lived on very amicable terms. When she heard that he was arranging for a second marriage, she came to him in a great rage. How now, said she, 2 hands in one glove, 2 swords in one scabbard, 2 wives in one house? Go, fickle man, since the caresses of a young and faithful wife cannot secure your constancy, I am ready to yield my place to my rival and retire to my own family. Repudiate me, return my dowry, and you shall never see me more. I am glad you have thus anticipated me, answered the Qazi, for I was somewhat perplexed how to acquaint you of my new marriage. So saying, he opened a coffer and took out a purse of 500 sequins of gold, and putting it into her hands, There, woman, said he, thy dowry is in that purse. Begone, and take with you what belongs to you. I divorce thee once, I divorce thee twice, 3 times I divorce thee. And that thy parents may be satisfied thou art divorced from me, I shall give thee a certificate signed by myself and my knave. This he did accordingly, and his wife went to her father's house with her bill of divorce and her dowry. The Qazi then gave orders to furnish an apartment sumptuously for the reception of his bride. The floor was spread with velvet carpets, the walls were hung with rich tapestry, and couches of gold and silver brocade were placed around the room. The bridal chamber was decked with caskets filled with the most exquisite perfumes. When everything was in readiness, the Qazi impatiently expected the arrival of his bride, and at last was about to dispatch a messenger to the dyer's, when a porter entered, carrying a wooden chest covered with a piece of green taffeta. "What hast thou brought me there, friend?" asked the Qazi. "My lord," replied the porter, setting the chest on the floor, "I bring your bride." The Qazi opened the chest and discovered a woman of 3 feet and a half, defective in every limb and feature. He was horrified at the sight of this object, and throwing the covering hastily over it, demanded of the porter, "What wouldst thou have me do with this frightful creature?" "My lord," said the porter, "this is the daughter of Omar the dyer, who told me that you had espoused her out of pure inclination." "O Allah!" exclaimed the Qazi, "is it possible to marry such a monster as this?" Just then the dyer, well knowing that the Qazi must be surprised, came in. "Thou wretch!" cried the Qazi, "how dost thou dare to trifle with me? In place of this hideous object, send hither your other daughter, whose beauty is beyond comparison. Otherwise thou shalt soon know what it is to insult me." Quoth the dyer, "My lord, I swear, by him who out of darkness produced light, that I have no other daughter but this. I told you repeatedly that she was not for your purpose, but you would not believe my words. Who then is to blame?" Upon this the Qazi began to cool, and said so the dyer, "I must tell you, friend Omar, that this morning there came to me a most beautiful damsel, who pretended that you were her father, and that you represented her to everybody as a monster on purpose to deter all suitors that came to ask her in marriage." "My lord," answered the dyer, "this beautiful damsel must be an impostor. Someone, undoubtedly, owes you a grudge." Then the Qazi, having reflected for a few minutes, said to the dyer, "Bid the porter carry thy daughter home again. Keep the 1,000 sequins of gold which I gave thee, but ask no more of me, if thou desirest that we should continue friends." The dyer, knowing the implacable disposition of the Qazi, thought it advisable to content himself with what he had already gained, and the Qazi, having formally divorced his hideous bride, sent her away with her father. The affair soon got wind in the city, and everybody was highly diverted with the trick practised on the Qazi. It will be observed that in the Arabian story there are two clever devices: that of the lady who tricks the boastful merchant, whose motto was that men's craft is superior to women's craft, into marrying the ugly daughter of the Qazi; and that of the merchant to get rid of his bad bargain by disgusting the Qazi with the alliance. The scene at the house of the worthy judge, the crowd of low rascals piping, drumming, and capering, and felicitating themselves on their pretended kinsman, the merchant's marriage, is highly humorous. This does not occur in the Persian story, and because it is the Qazi who has been duped into marrying the dyer's deformed daughter, and she is therefore simply packed off again to her father's house. That the tales of the 1001 Days are not, as is supposed by the writer of an article on the several English versions of the Nights in the Edinburgh Review for July 1886, page 167, mere imitations of Galland, is most certain, apart from the statement in the preface to Pettis' French translation, which there is no reason to doubt. See volume 10 of the Nights, page 166, note 1. Sir William Owsley in his Travels, volume 2, page 21, note, states that he brought from Persia a manuscript which comprised, inter alia, a portion of the Hazar-ul-Yek Ruz, or the 1001 Days, which agreed with Pettis' translation of the same stories. In the Persian collection entitled Shamsha Kukuha occur several of the tales and incidents. For example, the story of Naziradoli, king of Mosul, the merchant of Baghdad, and the fair Zainab, while the story of the king of Tibet and the princess of the Naimans has its parallel in the Turkish Kırk Vazir or 40 Wazirs. Again, the story of Kulub and the beautiful Dilara reminds us of that of Haji, the cross-grained in Malcolm's Sketches of Persia. But of the French translation, not a single good word can be said. The Oriental costume and phraseology have almost entirely disappeared, and between Petit de la Croix and the author of Gil Blas, who is said to have had a hand in the work, the tales have become ludicrously Frenchified. The English translation made from the French is, if possible, still worse. We there meet with persons of quality, persons of fashion, with seigneurs, and 1,001 other inconsistencies and absurdities. A new translation is much to be desired. The copy of the Persian text made by Pettis is probably in the Paris Library, and Ousley's fragment is doubtless among his other Oriental MSS in the Bodleian. But one should suppose that copies of the Hazar-u-Yek Ruz may be readily procured at Ispahan or Teheran, and at a very moderate cost, since the Persians nowadays are so poor in general that they are eager to exchange any books they possess for the circulating medium. End of section 71.
Chapter 72 of The Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12, by Anonymous. Translated by Richard Francis Burton. Section 72. Nur al-Din and the Damsel Sitt al-Milah. Volume 12, page 151. This is an excellent tale. The incidents occur naturally, and the reader's interest in the fortunes of the hero and heroine never flags. The damsel's sojourn with the old Mezuin, her dispatching him daily to the shroff, bears some analogy to part of the tale of Ghanim the Slave of Love, Volume 2 of the Nights, which, by the way, finds close parallels in the Turkish 40 Viziers, the lady's 18th story in Mr. Gibbs' translation, the Persian 1001 Days, story of Abu Qasim of Basra, and the Bag-o-Bahar, story of the first dervish. This tale is in fact a compound of incidents occurring in a number of different Arabian fictions. End of section 72. Chapter 73 of The Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12, by Anonymous. Translated by Richard Francis Burton. Section 73. Tale of King Inz bin Kays and his Daughter, Volume 12, page 191. Here we have another instance of a youth falling in love with the portrait of a pretty girl. See ante, page 328. The doughty deeds performed by the young prince against thousands of his foes throw into shade the exploits of the Bedouin hero Antar and those of our own famous champions, Sir Guy of Warwick and Sir Bevis of Hampton. End of section 73. Recording by Alan Mapstone. Chapter 74 of The Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12, by Anonymous. Translated by Richard Francis Burton. Firuz and His Wife, page 301. I find yet another variant of this story in my small MS collection of Arabian and Persian anecdotes translated from the French. I have not ascertained its source. They relate that a lord of Basra, while walking one day in his garden, saw the wife of his gardener, who was very beautiful and virtuous. He gave a commission to his gardener which required him to leave his home. He then said to his wife, "Go and shut all the doors." She went out and soon returned, saying, "I have shut all the doors except one, which I am unable to shut." The Lord asked, "And where is that door?" She replied, "That which is between you and the respect due to your Maker. There is no way of closing it." When the Lord heard these words, he asked the woman's pardon and became a better and a wiser man. We have here a unique form of the widespread tale of the lion's track, which, while it omits the husband's part, yet reflects the virtuous wife's rebuke of the enamoured sultan. End of chapter 74. Recording by Alan Mapstone. Chapter 75 of The Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12, by Anonymous. Translated by Richard Francis Burton. Section 75. The Singer and the Druggist, page 305. If Straparola's version is to be considered an adaptation of Ser Giovanni's novella, which I do not think very probable, it must be allowed to be an improvement on his model. In the Arabian story, the singer is first concealed in a mat, next in the oven, and again in the mat, after which he escapes by clambering over the parapet of the druggist's roof to that of an adjoining house, and his subsequent adventures seem to be added from a different story. In Ser Giovanni's version, the lover is first hid beneath a heap of half-dried clothes, and next behind the street door, from which he escapes the instant the husband enters, and the latter is treated as a madman by the wife's relatives and the neighbours, an incident which has parallels in other tales of women's craft and its prototype, perhaps, in the story of the man who compiled a book of the wiles of women, as told in Syntipas, the Greek version of the Book of Sinbad. In Straparola, the lover, as in the Arabian story, is concealed 3 times, first in a basket, then between 2 boardings, and lastly in a chest containing law papers, and the husband induces him to recount his adventures in presence of the lady's friends, which having concluded, the lover declares the story to be wholly fictitious. This is a much more agreeable ending than that of Giovanni's story, and, moreover, it bears a close analogy to the latter part of the Persian tale, where the lover exclaims he is right glad to find it all a dream. Straparola's version has another point of resemblance to the Persian story, so far as can be judged from Scott's abstract, and also from the Arabian story. The lover discovers the lady by chance, and is not advised to seek out some object of love, as in Giovanni. In the Arabian, the singer is counselled by the druggist to go about and entertain wine parties. Story comparers have too much cause to be dissatisfied with Jonathan Scott's translation of the Behar-i-Danish, a work avowedly derived from Indian sources, although it is far superior to Dow's garbled version. The abstracts of a number of the tales, which Scott gives in an appendix, while of some use, are generally tantalizing. Some stories he has altogether omitted, because they are similar to tales already well known. Unfortunately, the comparative study of popular fictions was hardly begun in his time, while of others bare outlines are furnished, because he considered them unfit for general perusal. But his work, even as it is, has probably never been generally read, and he seems to have had somewhat vague notions of propriety, to judge by his translations from the Arabic and Persian. A complete English rendering of the Bahar al-Danish would be welcomed by all interested in the history of fiction. End of section 75. Recording by Alan Mapstone.
Chapter 76 of the Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12, by Anonymous, translated by Richard Francis Burton. Section 76. The Fuller, His Wife, and the Trooper. The trick played on the silly Fuller of dressing him up as a Turkish soldier resembles that of the three deceitful women who found a gold ring in the public bath, as related in the Persian storybook Shamsa Ukuka. When the wife of the superintendent of police was apprised that her turn had come, she revolved and meditated for some time what trick she was to play off on her lord. And after having come to a conclusion, she said one evening to him, "Tomorrow I wish that we should both enjoy ourselves at home without interruptions, and I mean to prepare some cakes." He replied, "Very well, my dear. I have also longed for such an occasion." The lady had a servant who was very obedient, and always covered with the mantle of attachment to her. The next morning she called this youth and said to him, "I've long contemplated the hyacinth grove of thy symmetrical stature, and I know that thou travellest constancy and faithfully on the road of compliance with all my wishes, and that thou seekest to serve me. I have a little business which I wish thee to do for me." The servant answered, "I shall be happy to comply." Then the lady gave him 1,000 dinars and said, "Go to the convent which is in our vicinity. Give this money to one of the calendars there and say to him, 'A prisoner whom the emir had surrendered to the police has escaped last night. He closely resembles thee, and as the superintendent of the police is unable to account to the emir, he has sent a man to take thee instead of the escaped criminal. I have compassion for thee, and mean to rescue thee. Take this sum of money, give me thy dress, and flee from the town. For if thou remainest in it till morning, thou wilt be subjected to torture, and wilt lose thy life." The servant acted as he was bid, and brought the garments to his mistress. When it was morning, she said to her husband, "I know you have long wished to eat sweetmeats, and I shall make some today." He answered, "Very well." His wife made all her preparations, and commenced to bake the sweetmeats. He said to her, "Last night a theft was committed in a certain place, and I sat up late to extort confessions, and as I have spent a sleepless night, I feel tired and wish to repose a little." The lady replied, "Very well." Accordingly, the superintendent of the police reclined on the pillow of rest, and when the sweetmeat was ready, his wife took a little, and putting an opiate into it, she handed it to him, saying, "How long will you sleep? Today is a day of feasting and pleasure, not of sleep and laziness. Lift up your head, and see whether I have made the sweets according to your taste." He raised his head, swallowed a piece of the hot cake, and lay down again. The morsel was still in his throat when consciousness left, and a deep sleep overwhelmed him. His wife immediately undressed him, and put on him the garments of the calendar. The servant shaved his head, and made some tattoo marks on his body. When the night set in, the lady called her servant and said, "Hyacinth, be kind enough to take the superintendent on thy back, and carry him to the convent instead of that calendar. And if he wishes to return to the house in the morning, do not let him." The servant obeyed. Towards dawn, the superintendent recovered his senses a little, but as the opiate had made his palate very bitter, he became extremely thirsty. He fancied that he was in his own house, and so he exclaimed, "Narcissus, bring water!" The calendars awoke from sleep, and after hearing several shouts of this kind, they concluded that he was under the influence of Bang, and said, "Poor fellow! The Narcissus is in the garden. This is a convent of sufferers, and there are green garments enough here. Arise and sober thyself, for the morning and a harbinger of benefits, as well as of the acquisition of the victuals for subsistence, is approaching." When the superintendent heard these words, he thought they were a dream, for he had not yet fully recovered his senses. He sat quietly, but was amazed on beholding the walls and ceiling of the convent. He got up, looked at the clothes in which he was dressed, and at the marks tattooed on his body, and began to doubt whether he was awake or asleep. He washed his face, and perceived that the caravan of his mustachios had likewise departed from the plane of his countenance. In this state of perplexity, he went out of the convent and proceeded to his house. There, his wife with her male and female servants was expecting his arrival. He approached the house and placed his hand on the knocker of the door, but was received by Hyacinth, who said, "Calendar, whom seekest thou?" The superintendent rejoined, "I want to enter the house." Hyacinth continued, "Thou hast today evidently taken thy morning draught of Bang earlier and more copiously than usual, since thou hast foolishly mistaken the road to thy convent. Depart. This is not a place in which vagabond calendars are harbored. This is the palace of the superintendent of the police, and if the Simurgh looked with incivility from the fastness of the west of Mount Kaf at this place, the wings of its impertinence will at once become singed." The superintendent said, "What nonsense art thou speaking? Go out of my way, for I do not relish thy imbecile prattle." But when he wanted to enter, Hyacinth struck him with a bludgeon on the shoulder, which the superintendent returned with a box on the ear, and both began to wrestle together. At that moment, the lady and her maidservants rushed forth from the rear and assailed him with sticks and stones, shouting, "This calendar wishes in plain daylight to force his way into the house of the superintendent. What a pity that the superintendent is sick, or else this crime would have to be expiated on the gallows." In the meantime, all the neighbors assembled, and on seeing the shameless calendar's proceedings, they cried, "Look at this impudent calendar, who wants forcibly to enter the house of the superintendent." Ultimately, the crowd amounted to more than 500 persons, and the gentleman was put to flight and pursued by all the little boys, who pelted him with the stones till they expelled him from the town. At the distance of 3 farsakhs from the town, there was a village where the superintendent concealed himself in the corner of a mosque. During the evenings, he went from house to house and begged for food to sustain life, until his mustachios again grew, and the tattooed scars gradually began to disappear. Whenever anyone inquired for the superintendent at his house, he was informed by the servants that the gentleman was sick. After 1 month had expired, the grief of separation and the misery of his condition had again driven him back to the city. He went to the convent because fear hindered him from going to the house. His wife happened one day to catch a glimpse of him from her window, and perceived him sitting in the same dress with a company of calendars. She felt compassion for him, called the servant, and said, "The superintendent has had enough of this." She made a loaf of bread, and put some opiate into it, and said, "When the calendars are asleep, you must go and place this loaf under the pillow of the superintendent." The servant obeyed, and when the gentleman awoke in the middle of the night, he was surprised to find the loaf. He fancied that when his companions had during the night returned from begging, they had placed it there, and so he ate some of it. During the same night, the servant went there by the command of the lady, took his master on his back, and carried him home. When it was morning, the lady took off the calendar's clothes from her husband and dressed him in his own garments, and began to make sweetmeats, as on the former occasion. After some time, he began to move, and his wife exclaimed, "Oh, superintendent, do not sleep so much. I have told you that we shall spend this day in joy and pleasure, and it was not fair of you to pass the time in this lazy way. Lift up your head and see what beautiful sweetmeats I have baked for you." When he opened his eyes and saw himself dressed in his own clothes and at home, the rosebush of his amazement again brought forth the flowers of astonishment, and he said, "God be praised! What has happened to me?" He sat up and exclaimed, "Wife, things have happened to me which I can scarcely describe." She replied, "From the uneasy motions which you have made in your sleep, it appears that you have had extraordinary dreams." "Dreams, forsooth," said he. "Since the moment I lay down, I have experienced the most strange adventures." "Certainly," rejoined the lady. "Last night you have been eating food disagreeing with your constitution, and today the vapors of it have ascended into your brain, and have caused you all this distress." The superintendent said, "Yes, last night we went to a party in the house of Sergeant Bam, and there was roasted pilau, of which I ate somewhat more than usual, and the vapor of it has occasioned me all this trouble." Strikingly similar to this story is this trick of the first lady on her husband in the Fabliau de Troyes, Dame qui trouve un anel. Having made him drunk, she causes his head to be shaved, dresses him in the habit of a monk, and carries him, assisted by her lover, to the entrance of a convent. When he awakes and sees himself thus transformed, he imagines that God, by a miraculous exercise of his grace, had called him to the monastic life. He presents himself before the abbot and requests to be received among the brethren. The lady hastens to the convent in well-feigned despair, and is exhorted to be resigned and to congratulate her husband on the saintly vow he has taken. "Many a good man," says the poet, "has been betrayed by a woman and by her harlotry. This one became a monk in the abbey, where he abode a very long time. Wherefore I counsel all people who hear this story told, that they ought not to trust in their wives, nor in their households, if they have not first proved that they are full of virtues. Many a man has been deceived by women and by their treachery. This one became a monk against right, who would never have been such in his life, if his wife had not deceived him." The second lady's trick in the Fabliau is a very close parallel to the story in the Nights. She had for dinner on a Friday some salted and smoked eels, which her husband bade her cook. But there was no fire in the house. Under the pretext of going to have them cooked at a neighbor's fire, she goes out and finds her lover, at whose house she remains a whole week. On the following Friday, at the hour of dinner, she enters a neighbor's house and asks leave to cook the eels, saying that her husband is angry with her for having no fire, and that she did not dare to go back, lest he should take off her head. As soon as the eels are cooked, she carries them piping hot to her own house. The husband asks her where she has been for 8 days, and commences to beat her. She cries for help, and the neighbors come in, and amongst them the one whose fire the eels had been cooked, who swears that the wife had only just left her house, and ridicules the husband for his assertion that she had been away a whole week. The husband gets into a great rage, and is locked up for a madman. The device of the third lady seems a reflection of the elopement, but without the underground tunnel between the houses of the wife and the lover. The lady proposes to her lover to marry him, and he believes that she is only jesting, seeing that she is already married, but she assures him that she is quite in earnest, and even undertakes that her husband will consent. The lover is to come for her husband and take him to the house of Dan Eustace, where he has a fair niece, whom the lover is to pretend he wishes to espouse. He will give her to him. The wife will go thither, and she will have done her business with Eustace before they arrive. Her husband cannot but believe that he has left her at home, and she will be so apparelled that he cannot recognize her. This plan is accordingly carried out. a lover asks the husband for the hand of his niece in marriage, to which he joyously consents, and without knowing it, makes a present of his own wife. All his life long the lover possessed her, because the husband gave and did not lend her, nor could he ever get her back. Legrand mentions that this fable is told at great lengths in the tales of Sieur de Leviathan and the Facete Bebellini. 3 women wager which of them will play the best trick on her husband. One causes him to believe he is a monk, and he goes on and sings mass. The second husband believed himself to be dead, and allows himself to be carried to that mass on a bier, and a third sings in it quite naked. There's a very similar story in Campbell's Popular Tales of the West Highlands. It is also found, says Legrand, in the Convivales Sermones, in the Delices Verbrocote, and in the Facete of Lord Domenici. In the Contes Boré, 3 women find a diamond, and the arbiter whom they select promises it, as in the Fableau, to her who concocts the best device for deceiving her husband, but their ruses are different. End of Supplemental Nights, Volume 2. End of Section 76. End of the Book of the Thousand Nights and a Night, Volume 12, by Anonymous. Translated by Richard Francis Burton.